Today I want to talk about why there are so many Isekai anime around, and not as much classic fantasy anime, to a point where almost every new fantasy anime is an Isekai, by telling you what I think, in my opinion, is the advantage that an Isekai has over classic fantasy anime on a writing level that make them so much easier to write than a classic non-Isekai fantasy anime. Also explaining why there are so many of them. So without making you wait any longer, let's start the video. So the main advantage is that it's easier to do exposition in an Isekai, as the main character comes from our world, meaning that he understands everything we do and need to be taught everything we don't know, making an Isekai character perfect to have exposition delivered organically. Again, not saying I like exposition, in fact I don't, just that it's easier to do it this way. You know, because that they came from our world, well, obviously they will need to learn everything we need to understand, making exposition really easy to do naturally in those shows, as the main character can naturally ask some question about the world he is in now, something that would be weird for someone who came from that world to begin with. But with an Isekai protagonist, the writer don't even have to explain why we get exposition, we just get it, and it's natural by default. When normally it's pretty hard to do another story, especially with magic school fantasy. But I know what you're saying. Well, isn't there another way to do exposition that is as easy as that? Well, show like Little Witch Academia do it by having the main character not having any clue about the world of magic, not being in a wizard family and all. Because it explains why she has to learn everything we need to understand the story, and set up the tone for when they address the class issue. And that can make a very interesting story, but at the same time, some stories don't want to tackle those issues, but still want their main character to know nothing of the world they are in. In those cases, making your story an Isekai can be a solution to that problem. Furthermore, Isekai main characters are also easier to relate to, because they come from our world, making us experience those worlds for the first time with them, when it's not the case with classic fantasy anime. Again, not saying this is always the case, just that it can make it a lot easier to relate to the main character in an Isekai than a non-Isekai fantasy. Plus, because the main protagonist is most of the time the only character that comes from our world, they are automatically more identifiable. Well, at least when that's the point. When not, you can still get good characters though. And the thing with an Isekai is that you can make the protagonist an average guy with nothing really special to him until he is reincarnated into a fantasy world, where he then develops into a deeper character. Or not, some Isekai just make the character OP and that's it. But some of them end up turning into flesh out characters like Subaru from ReZero or Naofumi from Shield Hero. Two characters that start off as basic relatable guy to then become characters who have nothing in common, making us identify as them even after they change into more complex character, one that would have been harder if they started as they are now. Another perk of the Isekai genre is that Isekai characters also do not have to initially follow the rule of their new world, as the show can just say that when they came to the fantasy world, they gained some new ability. Whereas in a classic fantasy anime, the main character most often has to grow the way other characters do, and if they gain crazy ability, well, they have to explain it with the rule of the world. When an Isekai character can just be reincarnated OP, or with a certain power only he or she possess, like it's the case with Rising of the Shield Hero, where he is reincarnated with a shield unique to him, and they don't have to explain it more than he is the shield hero for it to make sense. Or do like with ReZero, where Subaru can turn back time when he is killed, kinda like restarting a video game to a checkpoint. And they also do not really have to explain it at first, as it came with their reincarnation, so something a fantasy anime has to explain at one point or the other can just be a perk that came with reincarnation in a fantasy, even if it's just that the character is OP because he played the game they are in before. Not saying this makes good writing, just saying that it's easier to write, so I understand why someone would choose to write it as a perk that just came with reincarnation. Like they make fun of in Konosuba, where Kazuma can choose any power to have in the fantasy world, but choose the useless goddess, just to get back at her for laughing at his death. Look, I am not saying that one is better than the other, I just think that using the Isekai card can make the storytelling in your show easier in some part. And while I think this is true, Isekai are in no way poor man fantasy in my mind. That only exist because they are easier to write, because some story just wouldn't work if they were not Isekai, like the Shield Hero and Konosuba, because the intro of the Shield Hero just wouldn't work with a fantasy, because in order to work, it needs us and the main character to expect a classic Isekai adventure in order to later subvert it in the episode. Or Konosuba wouldn't work otherwise, as it is a parody of some sort of the whole Isekai genre of anime, and without the Isekai formula, those two shows wouldn't have worked. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there are many advantages to a show being an Isekai that are not present in a fantasy anime, making them easier to do but not necessarily better, and by extension, explaining why there are so many of them over the other. And shows like Sword Art Online and Dr. Stone also have this appeal, because being transported into a video game in the case of SAO is also a form of Isekai, as the same role applies. He is sent to a new world with its own set of rule and lore, and he doesn't need to explain his power while still making him one of the most quote-unquote relatable character in the show. The same can be said with Dr. Stone, which is great by the way, because the main character wakes up in a future so different it could have been another world entirely, and it wouldn't have been so different, as the world he is in is basically a new one. Well, that's about it. So do you agree? Do you disagree? Which do you prefer, classic fantasy or Isekai anime? Well, you can tell me in the comment section below. So don't forget to leave a like and to subscribe if you liked the video and to want more videos like those.